In the busy, colorful city of Nabuto, Amaka and Lindio moved through life like two souls joined at the heart. They laughed together at the small things, like when the street vendors argued loudly over who made the better roasted maize, or when children chased kites through the dusty evening air. They whispered secrets late into the night, curled up in each other's rooms, promising never to let life pull them apart. Lindio knew every detail of Amaka's heart, her fears, her dreams, even the way she liked to hum softly while stitching dresses in her small tailoring shop. And Amaka trusted Lindio more than anyone else. She was more than a friend. She was like a sister, a mirror of her own soul. People in Nabuto often admired their bond, saying, "Look at Amaka and Lindio. Nothing can ever come between them." When Amaka married Jidenna, Lindio stood beside her in a flowing green wrapper, smiling proudly, as if it were her own wedding. Their lives felt like a perfect circle of trust, love, and sisterhood. Amaka never imagined that behind those warm smiles and shared laughter, the story of her deepest heartbreak was slowly being written by the two people she trusted most. At first, Amaka didn't notice much. Jidenna had always been a busy man, moving between business meetings and long hours at work, so when he started coming home late, she told herself it was nothing unusual. But then the little things began to add up. He would step outside to take calls, lowering his voice so she couldn't hear. Sometimes she'd walk into the room and find him quickly sliding his phone face down on the table, flashing that strange half-smile that wasn't meant for her. Nights that used to be filled with laughter and gentle talks turned into long stretches of silence. He would lie beside her in bed, his body there but his mind far away, lost in thoughts he never shared. Amaka's heart whispered to her that something was wrong, but she fought hard to silence it. Maybe he's just stressed. Maybe business is hard right now, she told herself. After all, she trusted Jidenna. She had built her whole life on that trust. And even more, she trusted Lindio. Whenever she felt a wave of unease, she would run to her best friend for comfort, and Lindio always had the right words to calm her. "Don't worry, Amaka. You and Jidenna are perfect together. He loves you," Lindio would say, holding her hand and smiling so sincerely that Amaka's doubts melted away. But deep inside, her heart was restless. She noticed how Jidenna's scent sometimes carried a trace of perfume that wasn't hers, how he avoided her eyes when she asked simple questions. She noticed how he smiled at his phone, a smile she hadn't seen directed at her in months. Still, Amaka kept her faith. She reminded herself of the man who once promised to stand beside her through everything. She clung to the belief that her marriage was strong enough to withstand whatever storm was brewing, never realizing that the storm was already here, and it was gathering strength right under her nose, in the hands of the two people she loved and trusted the most. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the streets of Nabuto seemed to rest after a long, noisy day. Amaka had cooked Jidenna's favorite meal, spiced jollof rice with roasted chicken, hoping it might bring back the warmth that had been missing between them. She set the table carefully, even lit a small candle, because in her heart she still believed love could be repaired if only they tried. But when Jidenna walked in, his face was heavy, his eyes avoiding hers. He didn't touch the food. He didn't even greet her with the usual tired smile. He just sat down, restless, tapping his fingers against the table. Amaka's chest tightened. She had 1,000 questions on her lips, but before she could speak, Jidenna broke the silence with words that shattered her world. "Amaka, I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving you. I'm with Lindio now." At first, she thought she had misheard him. The name rang in her ears like thunder. Lindio? Her Lindio? She laughed nervously, thinking maybe it was some cruel joke. But Jidenna's eyes were steady, cold, and certain. Her stomach knotted, and her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. "Lindio," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My best friend? My sister." Jidenna lowered his head, but his silence was louder than any confession. Amaka's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table, the candle flickering between them. She felt as if the walls of her home had collapsed on her chest. The man she had loved, the man she had built dreams with, had chosen the one person she had trusted with her soul. The pain was sharp, like a knife driven deep into her back. Betrayal from a husband was unbearable, but betrayal from a best friend was a wound that seemed too cruel to exist. Amaka's world spun as tears filled her eyes. She stared at Jidenna, searching for a trace of the man she once knew, but all she saw was a stranger. In that moment, She realized her life would never be the same again. The news spread through Nobuto faster than fire on dry grass. It didn't matter that Amaka tried to keep her pain hidden inside her home. People already knew. At the market where she once walked freely, buying fresh peppers and chatting with familiar faces, she now felt eyes following her every step. Whispers rose as soon as she passed. Some women covered their mouths to hide their smirks. Others pretended to pity her, but couldn't hide the glint of gossip in their eyes. "That's her," they whispered. "The one whose husband left her for her best friend." The words cut deep, sharper than knives. She would hear bursts of laughter behind her, and though no one said it to her face, she knew the jokes were about her. Amaka's heart felt heavy, but she refused to let her pain show. She straightened her shoulders, adjusted her wrapper, and lifted her chin high. People wanted to laugh, let them laugh. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. It was the hardest act of her life. Every step in the marketplace felt like walking barefoot on thorns. Sometimes she caught glimpses of Lindayo and Jidena together, hand in hand, parading their new love as if it were something pure. They didn't hide, and the sight of them burned Amaka's chest like hot coals. But instead of crying in public, she forced a smile. She bargained with sellers, she bought her groceries. She carried herself like nothing in the world could touch her. Behind closed doors, the tears came freely, soaking her pillow until dawn. But outside, she was determined to be unshaken. She knew people were watching, waiting to see if she would collapse under the weight of betrayal and shame. So she walked with quiet dignity, her head held high like a queen stripped of her crown, refusing to let the world see her crownless. And though her heart was bleeding, she told herself over and over, "One day they will not laugh at me. One day they will know my strength." The night was quiet, but inside Amaka's room, the silence was broken by her soft, uncontrolled sobs. She sat on the edge of her bed, the thin sheet tangled around her, tears streaming down her face like rain sliding over worn clay. Each sob carried the weight of heartbreak, betrayal, and humiliation. She thought about Jidena, about Lindayo, about the life she had imagined. A life of love, laughter, and trust, and how it had crumbled in an instant. Her heart ached so much it felt like it would burst, and yet the pain brought a strange clarity. She buried her face in her hands, wishing she could erase the memories, the laughter they once shared, the whispered promises that now felt like cruel lies. The moonlight fell across the floor, casting shadows that seemed to echo her loneliness. Hours passed and still she cried. She cried for herself, for the love she had lost, for the friend who had turned into a stranger, and for the man she had once trusted with her soul. But amid the heartbreak, something inside her began to stir, a spark that refused to die. Between the gasps of tears, she whispered to herself, "I will not be destroyed. I will not let them win. Even if I rise alone, I will rise." The words felt fragile at first, but with each repetition they grew stronger. She wiped her face on the sleeve of her wrapper, took a deep, trembling breath, and imagined a life where she was whole again, where she built herself from the pieces they had tried to break. By dawn the crying slowed. Her eyes were puffy, her throat sore, but her spirit had shifted. The room that had felt suffocating hours before now felt like the place where she would begin again. She stood by the window, looking at the first light of morning spilling over Nobuto, and felt a quiet determination settle over her. They had taken her love, they had taken her trust, but they could not take her strength. Not now, not ever. She promised herself, "I will rise. I will rise higher than they ever imagined." Amaka decided that crying alone in her room would not be enough. She needed to do something, anything, to turn the pain into something that could make her feel alive again. She returned to her small tailoring shop, a place that had always been her refuge, and began to work with a new kind of fire. Her fingers moved over fabrics as if each stitch could sew her broken heart back together. She experimented with colors she had never dared to use before. Deep golds that glimmered like the sun over Nobuto, rich purples that seemed to hold secrets, vibrant blues that carried the energy of the city streets. Her gowns began to take life, flowing with elegance, telling stories of strength, resilience, and beauty. Each design was a piece of her soul, a silent declaration that she would not be defeated. Word spread quickly through Nobuto. Women who had admired her work for years now came with hope in their eyes, seeking the magic that seemed to radiate from her hands. Even the most influential socialites started visiting her shop, amazed at how a small room tucked away in the heart of the city could hold such breathtaking creations. Amaka poured not just her skill, but her pain, her heartbreak, and her dreams into every stitch. Late nights turned into early mornings as she worked tirelessly, losing herself in the patterns and fabrics. She remembered the laughter she had shared with Lindiao, the smiles with Jidenna, and she transformed those memories into something powerful. The very emotions meant to break her became her fuel. Soon her shop was never empty. Customers from every corner of Nabuto came to see the gowns that seemed to shine with more than just fabric. They shone with the story of a woman who refused to be crushed. And in every appreciative smile, every admiring glance, Amaka felt her heart lift a little higher. She realized that her strength was no longer hidden behind tears or whispered promises. It was alive, vibrant, unstoppable, and it was hers. Amaka's work began to take on a life of its own. The gowns she designed in her small shop started attracting attention far beyond the streets of Nabuto. People whispered about the woman who could turn simple fabric into art, who could make anyone wearing her designs feel like royalty. Soon, local fashion shows began calling her, asking her to display her creations on the runway. Each event was more dazzling than the last, with models gliding in her vibrant Ankara prints, gold-threaded wrappers, and flowing dresses that caught the light like fire. Her name, once known only in quiet circles, began to shine across the city. Amaka was no longer just a tailor. She was becoming a brand, a symbol of elegance, resilience, and success. Meanwhile, Jidenna and Lindiao paraded their love openly, thinking their happiness made them untouchable. They posted pictures of fancy dinners, weekend getaways, and the laughter that once belonged to Amaka's home. But behind the smiles and photos, cracks were forming in their world. Problems Amaka didn't need to notice. She wasn't distracted by their show. She had no time for envy or revenge. Instead, she focused on her empire. Each stitch, each fabric, each fashion show a quiet step toward power they could never take away. Her shop expanded, then became a boutique. She hired young women from her neighborhood, teaching them not only how to sew but how to take pride in their work, how to believe in their own strength. Every dress that left her store carried a piece of her journey. The heartbreak, the tears, the determination to rise above it all. People began to talk differently about Amaka, not as the woman betrayed, but as the woman who transformed pain into triumph. And while Jidenna and Lindiao flaunted what they thought was happiness, Amaka walked through Nabuto's streets with a quiet confidence that no betrayal could touch. Her empire was growing, and with every passing day, she realized something powerful: success, built from the ashes. For months, Jidenna and Lindiao had paraded their love as if nothing could touch them. But behind the smiles and expensive dinners, cracks were beginning to show. Jidenna's business, once thriving, started to falter. Orders were delayed, clients complained, and soon, debts began to pile up faster than he could pay. Lindiao, used to luxury and grand gestures, found her lavish lifestyle slipping through her fingers. Designer clothes, fancy cars, weekend getaways, all the things they had taken for granted, suddenly felt like distant dreams. Their carefully built image of perfection was starting to crumble, and the people they had once looked down on no longer treated them with envy or admiration. Panic began to creep into their days. Meetings that used to be smooth became chaotic. Arguments broke out over money that wasn't there, over promises they couldn't keep. Lindiao would look at Jidenna with desperation, realizing too late that the life she had flaunted depended on stability they had ignored. And Jidenna, who once seemed so confident and untouchable, now paced their expensive apartment, muttering curses under his breath, wishing for a miracle he didn't know how to find. It was then that they remembered Amaka, the woman they had betrayed, the one they had thought would never rise above them. Her name had started appearing everywhere, in fashion magazines, on social media, at gala events. They saw her success, her growing empire, and a bitter truth hit them like a thunderbolt. The very woman they had tried to break was now the only person who could help them survive. For the first time, Jidenna and Lindiao felt fear, shame, and regret all at once. They had laughed at Amaka, whispered about her, and yet now they had no choice but to swallow their pride. They needed her. And the irony burned. The strength and empire they had ignored, the woman they had left behind, was now holding the key to their survival. But Amaka, who had once cried herself to sleep over their bee. The charity gala was buzzing with the city's elite, the hall glittering with chandeliers and the soft hum of conversation. Amaka stepped through the doors and the room seemed to pause for a heartbeat. She wore a gold ankara gown that shimmered under the lights, hugging her figure in all the right places and flowing elegantly with every step. Her hair was styled simply but perfectly, her makeup glowing, highlighting the strength and confidence in her eyes. She didn't just enter the room, she owned it. People whispered her name, turning their heads to look. "Is that Amaka?" someone asked, and others nodded, stunned by how much she had changed. She moved gracefully between the crowd, exchanging polite smiles and nods, but her eyes were calm, steady, and focused. She wasn't there to impress anyone, yet everyone felt her presence, undeniable and magnetic. Then across the room she saw them. Jidenna and Lindai were leaning close, clearly trying to get a better look at her. Their laughter from earlier days gone, replaced by stunned silence. Jidenna's mouth opened slightly, as if he wanted to say something but no words came. Lindai's eyes widened, and for a moment, Amaka could see the panic behind their carefully rehearsed smiles. The couple who had once flaunted their love, who had made her feel small and broken, now seemed like strangers staring at someone they no longer recognized. Amaka didn't rush toward them, didn't flaunt her success in words or gestures. She simply moved with quiet confidence, letting the room and them absorb her presence. Every step she took spoke louder than any insult or accusation could. Her gown caught the light again as she turned, and in that moment, the distance between the woman they had underestimated and the people who had betrayed her felt enormous, unbridgeable. They had expected her to be weak, to crumble, to beg, but this Amaka was untouchable, radiant, poised, and unbroken. And as she walked past them, every whisper in the Aro. Later that evening, after the gala lights had dimmed and the crowd had thinned, Jidenna and Lindai found Amaka standing near a quiet balcony, looking out over the city. The night air was cool, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and laughter from the streets below. For a moment they hesitated, shame and fear holding them back. Then finally Jidenna spoke, his voice low and shaky. "Amaka, we need your help." Amaka turned slowly, her expression calm but guarded. She studied them, the two people who had shattered her trust, who had walked away with her best friend and left her heart in pieces. Lindai's eyes were wide, almost pleading, and Jidenna's jaw tightened as he struggled to find the right words. "Please," Lindai added, her voice trembling. "We need investors. We need your support. We can't manage this on our own anymore." Hearing those words felt surreal to Amaka. These were the same voices that had once whispered behind her back, laughing at her pain, mocking her as she struggled to accept the betrayal. And now the very people who had caused her heartbreak were standing before her, vulnerable, desperate, and asking for help. Her heart beat faster, a mix of anger, disbelief, and quiet satisfaction flooding through her. Amaka stayed silent for a long moment, letting them feel the weight of her gaze. She remembered the nights of tears, the whispered consolations to herself, the slow rebuilding of her life from the ground up. All the work, the sleepless nights, the courage it had taken to rise from betrayal. It had all led to this moment. Finally she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "You walked away from me. You laughed when you thought I was broken. And now you want me to save you." Her words hung in the air, sharp but controlled, leaving no doubt who held the power now. She knew the choice she made in this moment would define everything. Not just for them but for herself. And for the first time she felt completely in control of her story. Amaka listened to them, standing tall, her posture calm but strong. She watched as Jidenna and Lindai stumbled over their words, their voices shaky with desperation. Every plea, every apology, every tremble of fear reminded her of the nights she had spent crying alone, rebuilding herself piece by piece. She could feel the power in the silence, the weight of everything they had lost and everything she had gained. For a long moment she said nothing, letting the tension grow, letting them feel just how much the tables had turned. Then slowly a small smile appeared on her lips. Not cruel, not mocking, but quiet, controlled, and full of confidence. "You left me for each other," she said, her voice steady, clear, and calm. "You thought you could break me. You thought I would stay down. But the one thing you'll never take from me, the one thing that no betrayal can touch, is my success." She paused, letting her words sink in, watching their eyes widen with realization. The same people who had laughed at her, who had mocked her pain, who had made her feel small, now stood in front of her begging for the very thing she had built with her own hands. And she smiled again, this time with a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing her worth. And now, she continued, her tone soft but powerful, it's the one thing you need most. Her words hung in the air, sharper than any insult or revenge. She didn't need to yell, didn't need to make a scene. Her calm strength, her poise, her brilliance, everything she had become, spoke louder than anything else could. In that moment, Amaka wasn't just the woman they had left behind. She was the woman they had underestimated. She was the force they could no longer control. And as she looked at their trembling faces, she realized that taking back her power wasn't about revenge. It was about standing tall, unbroken, and showing the world that nothing could ever steal what she had earned. Jidenna's shoulders slumped, and he lowered his head, unable to meet Amaka's steady gaze. The confident, proud man who had once walked through life believing nothing could touch him now looked small, defeated, and ashamed. He could feel the weight of every choice, every cruel word, every careless laugh at her expense pressing down on him. Lindio, standing beside him, couldn't hold back her tears. They ran freely down her cheeks, hot and relentless, as the realization of what they had lost finally sank in. They had thought they were clever, untouchable, above the woman they had betrayed. They had believed that Amaka, hurt and abandoned, would crumble, would fade into nothing. But they were wrong. They hadn't seen the fire inside her, the way she transformed pain into strength, betrayal into brilliance. And now, looking at her poised, radiant and untouchable, they understood, too late, that she had risen higher than either of them could ever reach. Lindio's voice trembled as she whispered, almost to herself, Amaka, we were wrong. Jidenna remained silent, his pride shattered, as he stared at the woman he had once loved, now untouchable in her grace and power. Every tear they shed, every pang of regret, was a bitter reminder that the life they had flaunted, the happiness they had paraded, was built on nothing compared to the empire she had created from her own hands. Amaka watched quietly, neither gloating nor speaking harsh words. She didn't need to. The pain of betrayal had already been repaid, not with revenge, but with a life so full and radiant that their regrets couldn't reach her. They were left with nothing but shame and sorrow, while she stood tall, a living testament to resilience. In that moment, the truth was undeniable. The woman they had tried to break had risen. She was stronger, brighter, and higher than them both. And as they looked at her, they understood the hardest lesson of all. Some people, when broken, don't just heal, they soar. Amaka took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air brush against her face. She could feel their eyes on her, Jidenna's shameful gaze and Lindio's tear-filled regret, but she didn't need to say a word. No argument, no harsh words, no angry confrontation. She had learned that true power didn't come from yelling or revenge. It came from calm, quiet confidence. Her gold Ankara gown shimmered under the soft lights of the gala, flowing behind her like a queen's robe with every step. Each movement was deliberate, graceful, and filled with the strength she had spent months building. She walked past them slowly, letting them feel the weight of her presence. Every whisper, every glance, every pause of breath around her spoke louder than any words could. Her silence carried more meaning than 1,000 speeches of anger or insult ever could. As she moved through the crowd, she could hear people murmuring, noticing how radiant and unshakable she looked. They didn't know the full story, the nights of tears, the betrayal that cut so deep, the sleepless hours spent sewing her pain into beauty, but they could see the result. A woman who had risen above heartbreak, who had turned despair into power, who refused to let anyone, even the ones who had hurt her most, diminish her light. Behind her calm exterior, Amaka felt a quiet satisfaction. She had transformed her suffering into something magnificent. She had survived, she had grown, and she had proven that no one could take her worth from her. By the time she reached the exit, the city skyline stretched before her, glowing in the distance. She stepped outside, the night embracing her like a loyal friend. And in that moment she knew, she didn't need their apologies, their tears, or their recognition. She had already won. Her silence, her dignity, her strength were more powerful than anything revenge could ever be. And as she disappeared into the night, the memory of her quiet, unbroken exit lingered in their hearts, a reminder to. The streets of Nabuto seemed to hum with a new energy, a quiet reverence for the woman who had risen from heartbreak stronger than ever. Amaka's name was on everyone's lips, not as the woman betrayed, but as a symbol of resilience, courage, and unstoppable determination. People admired the way she had taken the sharpest pain of her life, the betrayal of a husband and a best friend, and turned it into something brilliant. Every dress she designed, every event she attended, every step she took carried the story of a woman who refused to be broken. In markets, in offices, in the busy streets, people whispered about her success. Young girls looked up to her, dreaming of the day they could be as strong, as graceful, and as fearless. Mothers told their children about Amaka, not in fairy tales of magic or luck, but as a real woman who built her life with sweat, tears, and determination. She had become more than a designer. She had become a beacon of hope, proof that even the deepest pain could be transformed into power. Her boutiques thrived, each one a testament to her talent, vision, and relentless spirit. Every gown she created carried a piece of her journey, a reminder that beauty could emerge from struggle, and that strength could be worn like a crown. People didn't just buy her dresses, they bought a piece of her story, inspired by her resilience and unshakable dignity. Even those who had once mocked her, whispered about her, or betrayed her could not ignore the light she carried. Jidenna and Lindio faded into the background, their regrets powerless against the woman who had claimed her life and her destiny. Amaka walked through Nabuto with quiet pride, not because she wanted revenge, but because she had proven something far greater, that pain could be a stepping stone, betrayal could be fuel, and a broken heart could rise higher than anyone ever imagined. The city celebrated her not just as a successful woman, but as a symbol of strength, a living example that true. Years passed, but the story of Amaka never faded from Nabuto. People still whispered about the husband who had left his wife for her best friend, only to find himself powerless when the woman he betrayed rose higher than either of them. They told it in markets, in salons, in offices, and at family gatherings, shaking their heads in awe at the life she had built from heartbreak. Every time someone mentioned her name, it carried respect, admiration, and a little bit of envy. Amaka's story became more than just gossip. It became a legend. A story parents told their children about courage and dignity, about how pain could be turned into strength. Young women dreamed of following in her footsteps, not just as designers, but as women who could take control of their own destinies, who could rise above betrayal and walk taller than anyone who tried to bring them down. Even Jidenna and Lindio became a cautionary tale, a reminder that cruelty and selfishness could never destroy a heart determined to rise. Meanwhile, Amaka continued her work, her boutiques thriving, her designs sought after from every corner of the city. But she carried herself quietly, never flaunting her success, only letting her life speak. In the end, Amaka didn't just survive betrayal. She transformed it into brilliance, turning her pain into power, her heartbreak into a story that inspired an entire city. She became the symbol of unstoppable rise, a living proof that true strength is not about revenge, but about dignity, resilience, and the courage to claim your own life. Her story would be remembered, whispered, and celebrated for generations to come.